Begin the current Daf, Mesechta Nedarim Daf Ayin, begin 3 lines up from the bottom of the Yomid on Daf Samach Beis, where the Gemara continues the topic of this parak, discussing that of Hafaras Nedarim. We spoke about in the previous parak of Hataras Nedarim. Now we speak of that of Hafara in different cases regarding the husband, father's ability to do Hafara and Akama, and what happens if you're saying a statement that would sound like one versus another, and we continue with questions of Rabbah on this topic. With today's Daf, at least neshama for someone in my community reminded me today. We have 3 days in our family of Chayshich. We have yesterday was my uncle's Yortzeit, Yaakov Yisrael ben Yitzchak Isaac. My grandfather's today, Yitzchak Isaac ben Rabbi Yaakov, Neshama ben Aliyah, and tomorrow is my father's Yortzeit. So that we'll mention tomorrow. So some ideas we're going to discuss in today's daf are Kaim Leicha Yoim Umefi Leichi Lamacher. If someone says, the husband says, okay, I want it to be Mekuyim today, but I want it to be moved for tomorrow. What's the halacha going to be? He's saying it now, but he wants it to be Mekuyim today. Which, in the run, we'll see that there's possibly 2 questions in that question. Kaim Leicha Yoim, let's say he just says, I want it to be Mekuyim today. Is that inferring that, only today should be Mekuyim, but tomorrow should be Mufar? And let's say only say Mufar Leichi Lamacher. Let's say you don't say anything about today. You say, but tomorrow should be mufar. But does that infer that today you want to be mekuyim? If today's mekuyim, then you can't be mufar tomorrow because you're already mekuyim today. What happens if, let's say, you say kaim lechi shah umefi lechi shah? Is that different? Because then the hafara it's still within 24 hours. You could still do hafara, so maybe that would allow a hafara. Then we continue with the next mishnah of a theme we already mentioned previously in this parak of Mesa Av. If the father dies, we know that the Naira Marasa that we're discussing over here, they are together partners in being able to do the Hafara. What happens if one of the partners dies? So it depends. If the father dies, it doesn't get emptied out into the Baal. The Chassan has no right to be made for himself. But Mesa Baal, if the husband dies, then the father, meaning the Chassan, then the father has the ability to be made for on his own. Additionally, Baal Mefer Bebeger, the husband could do hafara when she's a begeres, and the Gemara will explain exactly what case they're talking about. And whereas Ha'av, Eini Mefer Bebeger, the father loses all rights. Once the girl turns 12 and a half, she becomes a begeres, father loses all rights to do the hafara. So we begin Samach Beis, 3 lines up in the bottom of the Yomid. We had mentioned regarding the sugya of Hakama and hafara. The halacha is Kayim b'yom shama. If you do the kiyum on the day that you hear about it, you can't do hafar tomorrow because in hafar hakama. Once you mekayim it, you already made the neder, then you cannot do hafar. But the Gemara says, Rabbi has the following question. Kayim leichi hayom. If you say, I want this to be mekuyim for you today. What's the halacha? Why? What's so special about those words? Miyamrina do we say, so it's command the amar law, it's as if he's telling her, Mufi leichi lamacher. I want it to be mufar tomorrow, because that's what he's saying. Only today should be mekuyim. If I'm saying only today, well, obviously I'm saying I want it to be mufar tomorrow, then it'll be having a farah. Or Dilma, maybe no, amala. Lamaisa, he didn't tell her that it should be mufar tomorrow, and although you want to infer, he never said it. So maybe once you mekayim it, it's going to be mekuyim. That's question number 1. So the Gemara continues at the top of Ayin Amud Aleph and follows on Im Tim Tzaleim. Okay, if you're going to say, okay, halay amala, lamaisa, he didn't tell her that it should be mufar tomorrow, and therefore it's not going to be mufar tomorrow. Now the Ran just points out, and it's related to the next thing the Gemara is going to say. He says from the wording of the Gemara right now, it sounds like, had he said the full sentence, Kayim leichi hayoim, and the mufar leichi lamacher, we're only saying he said Kayim leichi hayoim. It sounds like it should be mufar tomorrow, and that's the question. And the Gemara says no, Lamaisa didn't say it, but had he said it, what would the halacha be? Sounds like it would be obvious, it would be effective, that it would be mufar tomorrow. That's the inference of what the Gemara is saying right now. The problem is, the next thing the Gemara says makes it sound like that it's not effective. Why? Because Amar Allah, says the Gemara, let's say he tells her, mufar leichi lamacher. It should be nullified for you tomorrow. What's the halacha? What's the question? So the Gemara says, here also there's a diak. Miyamrin, do we say, wait a second, you can't do a hafara for tomorrow because they're kaimel in the drayim. If you're only doing the hafara tomorrow, that means you're mekayim it today, either passively or inferentially, but you're mekayim it today. Maybe no. Keeping the amalah kaim leichi hayom. Elmaisa didn't tell her it should be mekayim for you today. When you're saying it should be mufred for you tomorrow, it means actually mehayom kama. Meaning, it's not really today, you're saying it tomorrow, but you want it to be today for tomorrow because you're saying you want it to be tomorrow. The only way it can be tomorrow is if you did it today. So essentially you're saying it should be from today. Now, the problem, says the Ran, is that, wait a second, it sounds like it's obvious to Rabba that had he said to her, Kaim lechi hayoim, umufar lechi lemacher, right? The whole question is that when's it going to be effective? Because you're only saying mufar lechi lemacher. And now we're questioning, we're saying, would that work? But had you said kaim lechi hayoim, it sounds like that would be obvious that it would not be effective. So the Ran says those are contradictory inferences from the case of kaim lechi hayoim and mufar lechi lemacher. The first question makes it sound like it would be obvious that it would be effective, the hafara. The second question makes it sound like it would be obvious that it would not be effective. So on that says the Ran, you're right. Rabbah was really not sure about all the cases. And when he said, imtim taloima, and if you're going to say, haloi amar la, that he didn't tell her, it's like meaning the first words on this amid from the previous question, it's what's called a lishna katia. It's like a truncated terminology. You're right. The Gemara could have said, and if you're going to say, but he didn't tell her that it shouldn't be mufar tomorrow, and not only that even if he does say, maybe it's not going to be effective. So he's just saying that there's also included in the questions, although the inferences of the questions sound like that it would be disagreeing regarding what would be the case of Keim Lechi Hayem Mufar Lechi L'Macha. Even that's a question. So we're asking in general, that statement I don't know what it would be, and even the half of statements I also don't know which way it would be if you just say Keim Lechi Hayem or Mufar Lechi L'Macha. Okay, but then the Gemara continues and says that v'imtim zalema, if you're going to say afilachi, even so, even the kaima hayoim, no, even in this last case that we said, and you're just saying mufar lechi lemacher, I could tell you it's still not going to work. Why? Because the Meister means to say that today you makayim it, so lemacher command the isay dami. So then tomorrow is like it's still here, meaning since you're saying mufar lechi lemacher, that's the way the Ran explains it. You're saying it should be nullified tomorrow. The inference is that you makayim it today. Since you makayim it today, so tomorrow the ned is still here, and tomorrow is not a time of afara. So again, this all imtim tzlim, if you're going to say that even all these cases, hafar is not going to work, even if you're just saying mufal lemechel mocher, but I have the following question. Amalei, let's say he says to her, Amar la, kayim lechisha, I wanted to be mekum for you for an hour. Ma, what's the halacha? Because this is not similar to the case of today and tomorrow, when you say for an hour and the next hour. Why? Because the whole day is a time period when you could do hafar. We were saying all along, you say mufal lechi lemacher. Okay, mufal lechi lemacher, it's too late. It's tomorrow. But and it's like you're saying you should be mekum today because you're not being made for it today. At least on that imtim tzalema, if you're going to say. But hour and next hour is different because even if I'll say it's mekum now, so to speak, but I'm saying that it should be mufar in an hour from now, that's a time period when I could do hafara. As the Gemara explains, what's the question? Miyamrina, do we say commando amala? It's as if he's telling her mufar lechi la'achar shah dami. That if I say kemi lechi shah, that's all I say. I want mekum for an hour. It's like I'm saying, oh well, after the hour I want to be mufar, and that's a time period when you could be mefer. Or maybe no, hala amala. He didn't tell her I wanted to be mufar lechi la'achar shah. That's a question. Now, says the Gemara, Imtim is going to say, Holy Amala. This follows the same theme as the previous question of like Hayem and Machar. So Shah and Lachar Shah, if let's say said, I'm kaimit for Shah, yeah, the inference, the diuk, the implication would sound like I want to be made for Lachar Shah, but the Vice didn't say it. So maybe because he didn't say it, it will not be Hafar Lachar Shah. And then therefore it'll be Mukuyim. But, Miyu Amala, what happens if he does say? What happens if he says that I want to be Meifi La'achar Shah? Mai, what's halacha? What's the question? Says the Gemara, I mean, do we say that no? Keeping the kaima. I don't care if you said you mekayim for a Shah. Lamaisa, once you validate it, it's validated. I don't care if you validate it for 30 seconds. And now you can't be made for it anymore. I didn't know, keeping the kula yomi, since the whole day bar hakama bar afarahu is a time when you can do hakama and time when you can do hafara. When he tells her, I want to move after an hour, it's going to be effective. Because it's a time period when I could do hafara. And since I'm doing this right now in the beginning, I'm saying I want to be like this, then I could have the hafara take effect. So the Gemara says, Tashmat's being a raya from a Mishnah Masechta is Nazir. Mishnah says, Harein Nazira. The woman says, I'm really sick with this being a nazir. I want my hair to grow wild. I don't want to drink wine. And she says, I'm a nazira. V'shama Baal, the husband hears, and he's influenced by his wife. And he says, Vani, and me, meaning they're at some island retreat. They see people really living out there in the wild with their thing. And he says, and me. What's the halacha, says the Mishnah? Ein yochel lahafer. He cannot go, meaning the husband has the rights. A nazir is a type of neder. He generally has the rights to be made for his wife's neder. He's like, honey, we're not doing this. I'm being made for your neder. He cannot be made for her neder. Why? Because since he said, va'ani and me, he did what's called hatvasa. We spoke about this previously. A hatvasa is that transferring what someone did, their neder, you're transferring that for his own naziris. So he's revealing his intention that he's pleased with her naziris because he's actually using it to create his own naziris. So it's as if he was mekayim her naziris, and therefore he cannot be made for her naziris. That's what the Mishnah says in Masechtas Nazir. Says the Gemara, Vamai. Why? Nema, why can't you say like this? Vanidamahu, this that he says, and me, anafshe, to have a nazir. It was for himself to become a nazir. In other words, his intention was that he should become a nazir. And that's why he's doing hatfasa, he's transferring her naziris to himself. But her saying that I want to be a nazira, although that, of course, the sha'achas kaima, of course he has to substantiate her naziris for at least a moment. Because if not, how could he do hatfasa with it? But an hour later, if he wants to go ahead and be made for it, if you hold this principle, that when you say, Kaim lechi shah, I want to be it for an hour, I want to be made for it after an hour, is effective. Well, for sure if it's effective, it wouldn't make a difference if he says it at the same time, or he says that Kaim lechi shah, and then later on he says mufalechi, doesn't make a difference. As long as you're within the 24-hour period, you can be made for it. So then the question is, why is it that the husband cannot be made for her naziris later on the day? Lav mishum isn't because the kim the kaimu. You see that even if he said it for shah and la'achar shah, you see he can't, because if not, why can't he be made for it? Well, because he has to be matfis. Okay, good. He was mekayim for an hour because he needs it to be activated so he could transfer it. But 30 minutes later, why can't he be made for it? Obviously, because you say kim the kaimu. So the Gemara says, no, it's not a raya. From here, you cannot resolve the question because you're right. Maybe an hour later, you could be made for it. But here it's different than the Mishnah Masechtas Nazir, because Ksavar he holds kol vani. When you use the terminology and me, command the it's like as if you're saying kaim lechi lo'elam dame, as if you want to be substantiating it forever, and therefore we cannot resolve it from here, and therefore we're going to go stringently, and that's why it's not going to be hafara subsequently. But in general, if you don't say va'ani, you actually could be made for it after an hour, even though you mekayim it for the moment being. Now we're going to look at the next Mishnah, a sugya we already referenced before, which continues on this theme regarding the husband, the chassan, and the father, who are the partners in this nair marasa. Meisa'av, what happens if you have a kala and the father, she takes a neder, and the father passes away? So the halach is loinis rikner shus labal, that this dominion, this rights that the father has, does not get emptied out to the husband, meaning the chassan himself cannot be made for her neder. Meisabal, on the other hand, if the chassan dies, nisreikna rishos la'av, that does get emptied out to the father, and it's in this regard that the father has greater strength than the husband, and he can go ahead and make the afara on his own. But b'dava acher, regarding something else, there's a greater strength to the chassan than the father, which is shabal mefer bebeger, because the husband could do hafara when she's a begeris, even though she's over 12 and a half, which you must explain what case are you talking about. Whereas va'av, ein mefer bebeger, the father, his daughter, he cannot be made for when she becomes a begeris. She leaves his domain when she becomes 12 and a half. So, although regarding the shreikna, we say it's yafa koyach ha'av, regarding bagris, we say yafa koyach haba. Says the Gemara, my timer, what's the reason for this halacha of this, which the Ran just points out, that what's the reason why we're saying that it does not get emptied out, the reshus, to the husband, like it is to the father? Here it says my timer, and later on it says the other halacha of meisabal, that it is nisreikna to the father. It says manolan, Because that's asking, where do we know that from? And here we're saying, what's the reason? Meaning, we want to know, why is it that the husband is less than the father? Why, when the father dies, the chassan does not get it, whereas when the chassan dies, the father gets it? So it says the Gemara, because the Amakra, the pasuk says, Binoreha beis aviha. So it says, these are the chukim, and says, in her youth, in her father's household. That word base is an extra word that to tell us that even though the father's not here, you still have base aviha. So therefore, even if the father's dead, the father's household doesn't lose the rights on this naira, and therefore the chassan cannot do it himself because there's still the rights. It doesn't get emptied out to the chassan. Whereas, says the Gemara quoting from the Mishnah, but if meis habal, but if the husband dies, nisrek nushaslav, then the father himself could do the hafara. And that says Gemara Menal. Where do we know that from? So Rabbi says because Amakra. Pasuk says in Bamidbar, which previously the pasuk was talking about the hafara of the father, and it says right after the parasha where the father is made for the neder, it says Vim hayoy ish, if she's going to get engaged to a man, and she has nadarim on her. Now the word hayoy siya, why it's redundant? And the word hayoy or siya, it means havaya is the terminology of kedushin, of getting engaged. So why does it say 2 times? It says Getin Tamid Beis, it's makish. It's coming to equate, to compare koidme havaya shniya, the way she is before she gets engaged the second time, the koidme havaya rishayna, to how she is before she gets engaged the first time. In other words, the halacha of the second time is like the first time, which is ma koidme havaya rishayna, just like before the girl got engaged the first time. Av mefaluchudei, the father would do that far by himself because it's just his daughter. Av koidme havaya shniya. So too before the second kedushin, meaning when the chassan dies, which is essentially before she gets engaged a second time, is also avmei for luchadei. Is that the father does the far by himself. You see the way she is before she got engaged the first time is the same way she got engaged before. It's an interesting way of looking at it now that the chassan died, but it's before the second engagement, which is equating the two of them. Says the Gemara, how do you know this? Ema maybe say this hekish. When we say Nedarim and this is like a very big theme that comes up in these sugyas with the Iran about this niru. We mentioned this, we're going to mention more of this, of when the Oris has seen it, so to speak, meaning he heard about the neder, is different than when he doesn't. Because it's like your rights essentially are only activated when you hear it. Because even if, let's say, he doesn't hear it b'yom shema, he hears it 10 weeks later, it's the day that you hear of it, when you have a 24-hour period to go ahead and deactivate her neder. So, says the Gemara, maybe this whole halacha that was saying the father himself could do the hafara when the chassan dies, which is koid mi havaya shniya, and you're comparing it to koid mi havaya rishayni, which when the father do himself, maybe that's only just like it was koid mi havaya rishayna, meaning before she got engaged the first time, what happened? There was no aris that heard about it, because there was no aris. Maybe the koid mi havaya shniya is the same thing, it's only before the aris heard about it. But if, let's say, the aris heard about this neder before he died, maybe I would tell you that maybe the father cannot go ahead and do this hafara by himself. Maybe it's only shaloi nirul aris. But nirul aris is not the same thing as koid mi havaya rishayna. Maybe over there, the father would not be able to do it himself. Says the Gemara, no. Even the Nedarim shaloi nirul aris, if you want to tell me for Nedarim that the aris, the chassan never heard about, to say that there the father can do it himself, I don't need the hekesh for that. Why not? Says the Gemara, that's min b'nureha beis avia nafka. I learned that out from the pasuk of during her youth, she's in her father's household. Meaning, just like a single girl, which no aris have ever had a schus yet. As the Mefarish explains, it sounds like that as long as she's in her father's household, her father could be made for it. And if no chassan heard about it, this is exactly how she is, how she was a single girl. The hekesh, says the Ran, must be for a case when the chassan heard about the neder. That's where you need the hekesh to tell me the father could do it himself now that the chassan passed away. But the Ran just points out, importantly, that it's specifically if she didn't get engaged again. that same day. But if she got engaged, the Brisa teaches us on the next daf that explicitly that her father and her next chassan, or her last chassan, would be made for her Nedarim, because now it's not similar to Kodim Havai Rishayna, because now there is a chassan. So it's not the same way it was before she got engaged the first time, when there was no chassan over there. So then it would have to be between the two of them. But if she didn't get engaged another time yet, that's what we're learning out from being Makish Havai Rishayna to Havai Lishniya, that the father could do it himself, even though they were in the Nedarim Sheniru La'aris. Because it wasn't Niru La'aris. That means to say, like, no chassan never had anything over here, because it's only when he hears it. If you don't, they say, if a tree falls in the forest and no one hears it, does it happen? If he didn't hear about it, he had no rolla, he had no role over here at all. So that I don't need to learn that from the Hekesh, that I would know from the Nedarim Beisaviyah. The whole Hekesh is to teach me when it is Nedarim Sheniru La'aris. Now, the Mishnah continued and said, so okay, it's regarding this element in the above halacha that we mentioned, that the father has stronger power than the chassan, that when one of them dies, we'll only say nesroikna to the father, we won't say nesroikna to the chassan. But chulu is going on the rest of that statement which said, but regarding something else, then the father has a greater power than the father, which is, the Mishnah described that the Baal is mefer beggar. After he becomes a 12-year-old, the chassan could be mefer, but va'av ain't mefer beggar. But when she's after 12 and a half, the father cannot go ahead and be mefer. So that says the Gemara heichidami. What's this case that the Mishnah is describing that the Baal could do hafara when she's a begetter? As the Gemara explains. Elam, if you think it's talking about a case, shekidsha kishinara, that he engaged her when she was a nara, when she was under 12 and a half. Ubagra, and then she became, as a chassan and kala, she became over, again, remember their engagements were like a year. It was a yom and a mitzvah. It was a long engagement. So during the engagement, she was under 12 and a half, and then she matures and she's already begeres. And that's the case you're telling me that the chassan could do it, but the father cannot do it. So says the Mamechti, wait a second, let's see, what's the case? I have the following comparison. Misa Maitzia, and the Ran adds on, the Bach adds on the words Mishus Av. Death removes a girl from her father's domain, meaning when the father dies, so his rights are removed. In other words, what do you mean? Of course he's dead. No, it means to say he cannot be moedish that, he does not bequeath that to his sons. We know that from a pasuk in the Gemara learns on Ksubis, V'snachatem oisim levenechem. It talks about your slaves, you bequeath them to your sons, but your rights and your daughters, that you don't give over to your sons. Okay, so when the father dies, it removes her from his domain. And when she becomes 12 and a half, it also removes her from his domain, because it says in the pasuk, when she's a nara, she's in the father's household. But a begeres, who's not a nara anymore, is not b'rishus aviyah. So therefore, says the Gemara, so I'll make the following comparison. Mami said just like when the father dies. That does not empty out the rights to the chassan. Wait a second, the avbagris. So when this girl was engaged, she was just got her bas mitzvah. And Baruch Hashem, Mazel Tov, we have a simcha, it's going around the WhatsApps. This 12-year-old girl got engaged, and now during this year-long engagement, she becomes a begeres. So that's not going to get emptied out the rights to the chassan, because since the father's rishus had taken effect before she became begeres, because when she got engaged, she was a naira, so what's the difference? Misa and bagris are the same thing. Misa, you don't say nisreikna. So what do you tell me that the case would be that the chassan has more rights than the father when she becomes begeres, because the father loses the rights? On a kid, it's not any better than death. When he dies, it doesn't go to the chassan. So why shouldn't she become begeres? Would it go to the chassan? So Ella says the Gemara, no, the case is talking about shekid she begeres, like our girls. We don't have any more really 12-year-olds or 11-year-olds getting engaged. An 18-year-old girl, a 20-year-old girl. She was the begeres when she got engaged. That's what it's saying koyach habal is more than koyach av. In other words, you want to say that since the father does not have any rishus on her at all, so whenever it reaches the time that Chacham gave to a chassan and kala to provide for themselves, since from this point onwards, the chassan has to already feed her, as the Gemara brings in Perek Alpha over there on Daf Zayin and Ksubis. So at that point on, since he has to feed her, so he already has the rights to do hafara. That's what you tell me. Bizarre yofa koyach habal is, even though they're only engaged, at a certain point in time, the chassan may say, look, you gotta marry because it's already time, and you have to start feeding her already. So once he has to start feeding her, then she's already meshubatim, because like the Gemara says, all in Nedarim, she's taking al dai to the Baal, even though they're not really married yet, because he's feeding her and she's subservient to him. If that's the halacha, you're telling me, says the Gemara, Hatanina Chadazimna. This was already taught once later on this parak of Daf Ayin Gimel in the Mishnah. The Mishnah says, Habageres Sheshasa Yud Beis Chodesh. The Begeres, the 12-and-a-half-year-old girl, or 18 or 20 or 37, whatever it is, that she waited 12 months, etc., then you're going to go ahead and be able to do hafara on a Nedarim. So the Gemara is asking, why do you need two Mishnayos to say the same halacha? Now, the Ran just points out, before the Gemara gets a chance to conclude its question, the Gemara first is medayik from this later Mishnah on Daf Ayin Gimel that we just quoted, and the Gemara first explains it by asking a question. The Gemara says, wait a second, I'll go for kasha. How do you understand that Mishnah? Amrit, you're saying, Habageres, the adult girl, that waited 12 months in her engagement. Some people have very low engagement, they have to finish college or whatever, this and that. So it's a 2-year engagement. Again, halachically, if they did the real engagement with the ring. So that's the halacha that after 12 months they have to stop feeding and then he can be made for a Nedarim. What do you mean? That's not true. By a Begeres, you don't need 12 months. Begeres balam yem sagila. A Begeres is enough with 30 days, which the Ran actually explains. It's Rav Huna who holds like this over there in Masechet Ksubis, that the Chachamim said that a Begeres you only give 30 days. After that onward, because she's already older, she's been already mature for a long time, she only needs 30 days to prepare, and then after that, you have to already start feeding her. Says the Ram, but Rav Huna was refuted. That's why we're asking for Rav Huna. He says, yeah, but the Gemara over there concludes that whenever you have that there was 12 months already passed since she became a Begeres, if she gets engaged after that, then she only has 30 days. And you're not going to have this halacha that we disagree with Rav Huna, that it's going to be 12 months, only if she got engaged the day she became 12 and a half. And that's what the Gemara is asking. And saying, how are you saying a specific set amount? Did a Begeres, you tell me in the Mishnah later on it says 12 months, but a Begeres does not have a set amount. Rather, it cannot be less than 30 days. But you don't find to have that whenever she's going to be Mekadesh, when she's Begeres, that should be 12 months, only if she made the Kedushin the day she became Begeres. And for that one specific case, we shouldn't have said Begeres is 12 months, because it's only if she the day, 6 months after her Bas Mitzvah, then boom, she got engaged that day, a Fenzal gezukt, so, it's not always so easy. So the Gemara says, you're right, today you have to amend that Mishnah, that it's actually 2 cases. It's not Begeres Shashasa 12 months, it's Begeres according to Haralacha, which like we just said, sometimes is longer, sometimes is less, depending on when she became engaged, and V'Shashasa Beis Chodesh, a different case. And a Nara, who waited the time that's set for her, which is 12 months, then the husband's going to be obligated to feed her, and then he's going to be able to make for the neder. So we took care of that Mishnah. Fine. But says the Gemara, we're back to the question. Why do we need 2 Mishnayos teaching the same halacha of Begeres, that a Begeres, the husband could be made for her neder? You tell me, is that when he got engaged, she was a Begeres. Okay, that's the Mishnah later on Daf Ayin Gimel. Says the Gemara, 2 approaches. If you want, you could say that the case of Begeres over here, when we're saying that Yafa Koyach Habal, that's Dafka. That's the primary case that we're talking about. Ubegeres Ketani Hasam, and Begeres that we said over there on Daf Ayin Gimel, that is only Misham the boy Iflugi Rebbe Lazar Rabbanan. We just wanted to mention the Machlekes Rebbe Lazar Rabbanan. In other words, we repeated our Mishnah over there to tell us that our Mishnah's halacha Yafa Koyach Habal is actually not unanimous. It's not going according to everyone, because this that we said that the husband can be made for Bebeger is not like the Rabbanan, because a Chamasi you cannot be made for. Where Sharan says, I find this very difficult. You're telling me that the case of Begeres over here is the primary. To the contrary, the later Mishnah of Ayin Gimel is the primary, because that you need to tell us not to rely on this Stam Mishnah over here, because you would think to say that it's Stam and Achkach Machlekes, which we say the halacha. We want to tell you that it's not a Stam Mishnah. That's when you say Stam Achkach Machlekes, you say the halacha is going to be like Machlekes, not like Stam. So why are you saying this Mishnah is the primary? That Mishnah is the primary. So it says around, you're right. When the Gemara is saying that the Begeres to Hacha is Davka, that's Lav Davka. It's interesting the way he says it. That Davka is Lav Davka. Rather means to say that later Mishnah is coming after our first Mishnah. It's like secondary to our Mishnah. Meaning, that Tana is not starting his own conversation in Begeres. He's following our Mishnah's lead that started to talk about it, and then that subsequent Mishnah is coming to tell us, don't rely on this first anonymous Mishnah, because it's not according to everyone. But you're right, then it comes out that Mishnah is the main, but it means this one's the main because it started the conversation. That's one approach. Or another approach you could say is, Begeres over there, as some Girsahs have, is Dafka, like the Ran has. Begeres the Hossam Dafka. Meaning over there is where the Tana started to explain the laws of Begeres, because our Mishnah over here does not have a halacha as a stam masnitin. It's not an anonymous Mishnah. It's not really that the Mishnah over there had to bavarin and forewarn and say that our Mishnah is, don't think it's a stam Mishnah, we have to say machlekes. No, our Mishnah is not even really significant. Why? Because it's only v'aydid in nasa b'reisha b'zeh. It's only because the first part of our Mishnah spoke about Yofa Koicha Ab Mekoicha Baal, which we said the halacha of Nisreikna, of when one of them dies, it only goes to the father, but when the father dies, it doesn't go to the chassan. So not so safe and not b'zeh. We just want to do the counterweight according to one Tana that there is something else that the chassan is stronger than the father, which is regarding Bageres. That's what I mentioned, but it wasn't even like we were saying in a halacha to tell you, oh, a stamas nitin. No, we're just saying like there is a counterpoint regarding one Tana, but not because it's a stamas nitin. It's just we're saying it. The Yafa Koicha, the primary context of our paragraph was this idea of Yafa Koicha Ab, which is Nisreikin, which is talking about that of Hafaras and Nadarim. So we just mentioned Yafa Koicha Baal, but therefore it's not our Mishnah's primary, it's that Mishnah, but that was primary. Thank you to any time.